A new generation is meeting Charles Ingalls all over again. To most viewers, he is the cheerful father from television, steady, optimistic, and somehow always finding a way through hardship before the credits roll. But the historical Charles Ingalls lived a life that was far more complicated. He uprooted his family repeatedly, struggled with debt, watched crops fail, and spent years chasing opportunities that did not work out as planned. Yet, the one thing television and Laura's books got right may be the reason his family survived any of it. Fact number 1. Charles Ingalls moved his family again and again. The television version of Charles is rooted in Walnut Grove. The real man was not. By the time Laura was 12, her family had lived in Wisconsin, Kansas, Wisconsin again, Minnesota, Iowa, Minnesota again, and Dakota Territory. That list leaves out shorter stops and moves within the same communities. The family crossed and recrossed hundreds of miles with children, livestock, tools, bedding, seed, food, and whatever household goods fit in a wagon. The reasons changed. Charles wanted land. He wanted room. He followed work. He tried to get ahead of debt and crop failure. At times, he seems to have believed that the next place would offer the independence the last place had denied him. That restlessness was real, but it was not the carefree wandering sometimes remembered from television. Every move placed another burden on Carolyn and the children. A new claim meant another house to build, another field to break, another winter to prepare for, and another local economy in which the family had no established footing. Kansas is the clearest example. Around 1869, the Ingalls family left Wisconsin and settled near Independence. The cabin stood within the Osage Diminished Reserve. The land had not been legally open to white homesteading. Charles was one of many settlers who entered before they had a lawful claim. When the family left in 1871, the federal government was preparing to remove unauthorized settlers. Although illness, money, and the family's own circumstances may also have influenced the decision. The simple version says the government took their home. The fuller version is that the home had been built on land the Osage still held under treaty. Then came Wisconsin again. Then Plum Creek near Walnut Grove, where Charles obtained land under federal preemption law. Then Burr Oak, Iowa, after grasshoppers devastated Minnesota crops. In Burr Oak, the family helped operate a hotel on a busy stage road. They returned to Walnut Grove and tried again. In 1879, Charles accepted railroad work in Dakota Territory and moved the family west once more. Once the family reached Smet, Charles stayed. He filed a homestead claim in February 1880, met the government's residence and improved requirements, and eventually received title. He later sold the farm and moved into town, but he did not pull Carolyn and the younger girls into another cross-country gamble. The man remembered as forever following the horizon spent the last 23 years of his life in and around one small Dakota town. That changes the picture. Charles was restless, and some of his choices exposed his family to real hardship. He was also capable of recognizing when the search had gone far enough. The television homestead feels permanent because a weekly series needs a permanent stage. The historical record shows how long it took him to find one. Fact number 2. The Ingalls family was often one bad season from ruin. Television gave Charles a fresh crisis almost every week, but it usually gave him a solution before the hour ended. Real farm debt did not work that way. A family could spend months breaking prairie sod and planting a crop, then lose the return in a day. There was no crop insurance check, no reliable wage waiting nearby, and no guarantee that next year's seed could be bought on credit. At Plum Creek, Charles was not living on free land. His tract lay near a railroad line and came through the preemption system, which required payment. Records show that in July 1876, he paid $430.50 for the claim, then sold it only days later for $400. Even before counting buildings, labor, seed, and equipment, the land transaction ended with less money coming back than had gone out. The family left Minnesota after successive grasshopper invasions damaged crops throughout the region. Burr Oak was not another homestead adventure, it was wage work. Charles agreed to help run the Masters Hotel. Carolyn cooked. Mary and Laura served guests and did chores. The hotel stood near a saloon, and the family lived in conditions Laura later chose not to place anywhere in the Little House series. Charles also worked around a feed mill and took whatever paid work the situation offered. Laura herself worked outside the family while still a child. This was not the prosperous independence that later became attached to the Ingalls name. It was a household using every available pair of hands. The most controversial episode came when the family left Burr Oak. Laura's unpublished adult memoir described the departure as a hurried nighttime exit, while creditors remained unpaid. Historians have treated the incident carefully because a remembered family story is not the same thing as a complete set of account books. Still, the episode fits a broader, well-documented pattern. The Ingalls family had debts, unstable income, and few reserves. Charles was not a frontier patriarch who always paid cash from a heavy purse. Sometimes he could not make the numbers work. Back in Walnut Grove, friends gave the family a place to stay while Charles found employment. Laura worked as a hired girl before she was a teenager. In 1879, the railroad job offered another way out, and Charles took it. Even in Dakota Territory, the story did not turn quickly into prosperity. His general store opened in 1880 and closed the following year. His homestead survived long enough for him to prove up, but drought helped persuade him to leave farming behind. In 1892, he sold the claim and relied increasingly on carpentry and town work. Calling Charles constantly broke can make him sound lazy or foolish. The evidence does not support that. He worked, as did Carolyn and the girls. Effort could not protect a 19th century family from insects, weather, sickness, land costs, weak local markets, or a store without enough customers. Charles' optimism sometimes led him into risk, but the frontier economy supplied plenty of danger without his help. This fact also explains something the polished versions tend to miss. The Ingalls family's self-reliance was genuine, but it was never complete isolation. They depended on wages, neighbors, employers, merchants, railroads, public land law, and community help. Charles did not survive because he stood alone. He survived because he could work inside whatever system was available when farming failed. Moving often and losing money can make Charles look less capable than the man on television. The next fact reverses that impression. His problem was not that he knew too little to survive. It was that even a man with a frontier-sized range of skills could not control weather, markets, law, or luck. Fact number 3, farming was only one of the ways Charles kept his family alive. The familiar image is Pa behind a plow, with a rifle over the cabin door and a fiddle waiting for evening. All of that has a basis in the family record, but it leaves out the breadth of his working life. Charles farmed, hunted, trapped, butchered, hauled freight, worked for a railroad, helped operate a hotel, ran a small store, and earned steady money as a carpenter. He also held public offices that required neighbors to trust his judgment. Carpentry became especially important. In Smet, Charles built and repaired houses as the town grew. He constructed the family's house on 3rd Street, where he, Carolyn, and Mary later lived. He helped direct the first congregational church and was one of its charter members. That kind of work demanded more than swinging a hammer. A town carpenter had to select material, lay out a building, cut joints, set doors and windows, repair what weather had moved, estimate a job, and finish it with limited manufactured parts. His railroad work required another kind of usefulness. In 1879, he went ahead to Dakota Territory with a Chicago and Northwestern Railway crew. The railroad was opening new town sites and pushing settlement west. Charles took work connected to that expansion and brought his family to the surveyor's house near Silver Lake. Once again, he had converted practical ability into shelter and a foothold in a new place. Hunting mattered, but not in the television sense of a perfectly timed deer appearing whenever the pantry emptied. Wild game supplemented food and could provide hides or trade value. A working rifle also had to be maintained, ammunition conserved, weather read, tracks followed, and meat handled quickly after the kill. Laura remembered Charles as a capable woodsman, but the family's later life also shows a man adapting as wild country became farms and towns. He did not cling to one definition of frontier manhood. When hunting mattered less, carpentry, railwork, retail, and public service mattered more. In Smet, he served as a justice of the peace and deputy sheriff, becoming part of the local government. The restless settler who had once occupied land before it was legally open was later trusted to uphold order in a new community. Neighbors elected him because they knew him in daily life, not because they had read a daughter's tribute decades later. His store failed, his farms never made him wealthy, and his movements suggest a man who sometimes reached beyond what the family's finances could safely bear. Yet, he remained employable almost anywhere. That was one of the most valuable survival skills a frontier father could possess. Charles did not have one trade. He had a collection of working abilities that could be exchanged for wages, land, shelter, food, or standing in a community. Even his homestead claim shows this mixture of labor. When Charles gave final testimony, federal officials were not asking whether he embodied a pioneer ideal. They wanted evidence. Had he lived on the land? Had he cultivated it? What had he built? The claim depended on years of residence and visible improvements as opposed to a dramatic moment of courage. A settler earned title through the slow accumulation of work that could be inspected by neighbors and recorded by the land office. This is one reason his later move into Smet should not be treated as surrender. Charles had done what the law required and secured title, but farming no longer offered the best use of his labor. Town carpentry could produce cash without waiting for rain. Public office tied him to neighbors rather than acreage. Selling the farm and building a house in town was an adaptation to conditions, much like taking railroad work after the Minnesota crops failed. The dream changed because the country around him had changed. Television could show him repairing a wheel or raising a wall. It could not easily show the long, unglamorous pattern beneath those scenes. When one livelihood collapsed, he shifted to another. He was not invincible. He was adaptable, and adaptability was the more useful gift. Fact number 4. Laura's Little House books were novels, not a complete family record. This does not mean Laura lied. It means she was an author. She began publishing the Little House books in the 1930s, roughly half a century after the childhood events they described. She drew on memory, family, stories, research, and an unpublished autobiographical manuscript called Pioneer Girl. She and her daughter Rose Wilder Lane then shaped that material into books for younger readers. Chronology was adjusted, people were combined or omitted. Events were moved to places where they served the story. The Ingalls family's time in Burr Oak disappeared from the series altogether. Even though Grace was born there and the period included the hotel, wage work, debt, and some of the roughest circumstances Laura remembered. Her baby brother Freddie, who died before reaching his first birthday, was also absent from the finished children's sequence. The order of the books creates another illusion. Little House in the Big Woods was published first and presents Laura as a young girl in Wisconsin. Little House on the Prairie then sends the family to Kansas. Historically, the Kansas period came before the family's later return to Wisconsin. Laura was only about 3 years old when the family left Kansas, so some of the vivid episodes necessarily came through older relatives, later reconstruction, or artistic shaping rather than an adult-grade memory of her own. The changes had a purpose. She was building a coherent childhood world, a hotel beside a saloon, an infant's death, unpaid bills, and the less flattering details of family instability did not fit every book she wanted children to inhabit. The result preserved real places, tools, meals, weather, labor, and family habits while arranging them inside a selective story. The contrast becomes especially clear when Pioneer Girl is placed beside the finished books. The adult manuscript contains harder edges, adult behavior, community conflict, and financial strain that the children's series either softened or removed. It also shows how memory itself works. Laura could preserve an image, a song, or a family saying with extraordinary force, while dates and sequences required checking. The editors of the annotated manuscript have used newspapers, land records, genealogies, and local documents to separate recoverable history from remembered story. That does not make the smaller domestic details worthless. Often, they are the reason historians value Laura at all. Government files can tell us when Charles filed a claim. They rarely tell us what work sounded like inside the house, which songs a father chose, how food was divided, or how a child understood a blizzard. The official record and the family story answer different questions. Charles becomes visible only when both are used. Rose's role has produced decades of argument. Surviving drafts and correspondence show that she edited, suggested, rewrote, and helped shape the books. Scholars continue to debate exactly how much language belongs to each woman in particular passages. What can be said safely is that the series emerged from collaboration. Laura supplied the life, memory, authority, and central vision. Rose brought considerable editorial experience. The final books are neither raw memoir nor an outsider's invention. That distinction matters most when judging Charles. We know him largely through a daughter who loved him and chose him as the moral center of her childhood books. She showed his humor, music, work, tenderness, and confidence because those were real parts of her memory. She reduced or excluded parts that would complicate the shape of Pa. Television then adapted the shaped character, not the unfiltered man. So, the books are evidence, but they must be read beside land files, census schedules, newspapers, church records, property transactions, letters, and Pioneer Girl. When those records disagree with the children's series, the disagreement does not destroy the books. It reveals what Laura was doing. She was preserving the emotional truth of her family while turning an unstable childhood into a home readers could return to. Fact number 5. The warmth at the center of Pa was not invented for television. After the moves, the debt, the questionable Kansas claim, and the edited family history, it would be easy to swing too far and decide that the beloved Charles Ingalls never existed. That would be another distortion. The strongest evidence for his character does not come only from Laura. It comes from the community in which he finally stayed. In Smet, Charles helped build a church and joined it as a character member with Carolyn and Mary. He served in local offices. He worked in neighbors' homes and businesses. He remained in town after Laura married and left. When he died in 1902 at 66, local accounts remembered a respected citizen known for honesty, kindness, faith, and devotion to family. Obituary language can be generous, but public trust accumulated over 2 decades is harder to dismiss. The music was real too. Charles played the fiddle, and Laura tied specific songs to specific memories throughout her writing. The instrument was no studio prop added to soften a television father. In isolated homes, music met a practical human need. A fiddle marked worship, dances, gatherings, holidays, and ordinary evenings, when darkness arrived early and there was nowhere else to go. Charles could change the feeling inside a small room without spending money the family did not have. Laura's portrait of him was idealized because children often see a parent through what that parent makes them feel. She remembered danger, but she also remembered Pa's voice telling them what would happen next. She remembered hunger and cold, but also songs. She remembered leaving one home after another, but the constant figure in those memories was her father. His confidence did not always predict the future correctly. It still gave the children a way to face it. Carolyn paid a heavy price for Charles's appetite for new beginnings, and a fair history should say so. The girls worked because the family needed their labor. The family accepted help. Charles made decisions that look risky even by the standards of his own era. Love does not erase any of that. It explains why Laura could know the hardship and still write him as a hero. That may be what every successful version of Charles Ingalls recognizes. His greatness was never an ability to find a solution before the credits. The record proves otherwise. Failure did not make him useless, cold, or absent. He went back to work. he learned the needs of a new place. He played for his family. And eventually, in Smet, he stopped moving long enough to become the steady man people now remember. The real Charles Ingalls was harder to admire than the television father, and easier to respect. He was restless, financially vulnerable, sometimes mistaken, broadly skilled, publicly trusted, and deeply loved. Which part of the real Charles changes your picture of him most? The moves, the debt, the range of skills, the edited family story, or the man Smet remembered? Like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and we'll see you in the next one.